Hello, YouTube. Hello, world.
Hi, hi.
Got Vincent here, also a very active on this here platform, YouTube. We're going to talk a bit about that as we kick off the show. Vincent, are you ready to do the episode?
Have I ever been? Yes. No, I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to catching up with you and talking about this stuff some more. And
Hang on.
it's gonna be great.
Wait, sorry, the audio
Vincent,
thing was I was watching the YouTube thing. Yes, hi, we're back. Hi, sorry.
hey, welcome to Talk Python to Me.
Hi.
Welcome
Yeah,
back.
pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's been like, this is our second Talk Python interview, I think. We've interacted before also on socials and all that. But like, yeah, second time. Yay. Happy to be here.
Yeah. It's very exciting to have you back. I'm trying to remember. I did a blog post on the most popular episodes of last year, and I think, if I do recall correctly,
Yeah, the number one last year was our interaction, I think, on space. Yep,
that's
the
not
one.
terrible, is it?
Yeah, it was a bragging right for a day.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So your episode and double bragging rights is your episode was released in, I don't know when that was, something like October or something, almost exactly a year ago to the day, and still it was the number one most downloaded for the whole year. So fantastic. And I think that might be an indication of where we're going to another very exciting topic,
Yeah, like ML and AI only went up, right? So
You know what? I would love to get your thoughts on this. I'm seeing out on the internet, and I want to put this up as kind of a to counter this thought or whatever. But I'm seeing a lot of people get really frustrated that AI is a thing. OpenAI just released their Atlas browser, which I'm not super excited about, but it's like their version of what an AI browser wrapping Chromium looks like. You know what I mean? And it's fine. But the comments in Ars Technica, which are usually pretty balanced, are just like people losing it over the fact that it has AI. Are people tired of this stuff, or why do you think that's the reaction? I guess is really what I want to ask you.
I guess I have like a couple of perspectives, but like I think I could say like we are all tired that like every tech product out there is trying its best to find a way to put AI in the product. Like, oh, any Gmail, any calendar app, let's put AI in there, and it gets a bit tiring. Like, I wouldn't be too surprised if like fire hoses and refrigerators also come with AI features these days. Like, it feels a bit nuts.
I know. It's like, what is my refrigerator need AI for? It's
yeah, like, or like soccer ball, whatever object. Like, it feels like people are overdoing the AI thing. So, okay, that can be a like legitimate source of frustration. But then it also becomes a little bit personal, because I can also imagine if you put like your heart and soul into like being a good engineer, and like you want to take the internet serious, like you consider it something that's somewhat sacred because it helped you so much in your career, then I definitely can also imagine like, oh my God, please don't turn that into slop. Like, I built a career on that. So that might be the source of all these things. I guess like my main way of dealing with it is more along the lines of like, okay, like this genie's not going to go back into the bottle in a way. But if we're able to do more things with these LLMs, if they're able to automate more boilerplate and that sort of a thing, then it seems that then I can try and get better at natural intelligence as well, instead of this artificial intelligence. So like, okay, I can vibe code all these things now. So the bottleneck is just, do I have good ideas? And maybe I should invest in good ideas. And oh, maybe I can actually learn about JavaScript, but then I should not focus on the syntax, but I should focus maybe on the browser and like how does CSS work. And I should actually maybe do a little bit of stuff with flashcards just so I know the syntax just enough so I can review. Okay, but like I try to be very conscious about it that way. That's kind of my approach more. And
it's easy to get really lazy, right? And just push the button and say, do the next thing, and not use it as an opportunity. Like, oh, it did something I didn't know. Let me have a conversation and try to understand this thing I didn't know.
I think the key word here is you want to be deliberate about it. Like, I think if you can sort of say like, okay, I'm deliberate about the way I use this stuff, and I'm also learning as I'm doing this. Like one thing I really like to do is just give like some sort of bonkers front end task to the LLM that I have no idea how I would solve it, and then study the output. Like that's the thing I actually do once in a while. But yeah, I mean, I do get it that like people have mixed emotions about it, and that's totally cool and fine. It's just that for me, in my situation, this is how I deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think also I definitely have long since been tired of like every email app having to rewrite this with AI, and it usually destroys the email. Like removes
Yeah,
all the formatting. And then you just, there's always the cartoon of like, I wrote an email as bullet points. I asked AI to expand it. I sent it to you. You're like, what a long email. I'm going to ask AI to summarize this. We should have just sent the bullet points.
yeah. I mean, but I do fear the amount of slop, though. Like I do, it almost feels like every good tech YouTuber. There aren't a lot of good tech YouTubers anymore because they're all doing AI stuff instead of doing like actual really great programming. There's still a few.
Yeah.
Anthony
Yeah.
Writes Code is like a really good one still. Like he's awesome. Definitely follow him if you want to learn Python. He does cool stuff. Um, but yeah, like the main thing, I guess, from my like selfish perspective, YouTube used to be better because nowadays it's all about the AI, and you've always got this thumbnail of a guy pulling his hair out, like, "Oh my god, this changes everything."
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love to
And
see a video that's maybe not that.
have you heard that there's an AI bubble that's going to burst?
Yeah, we'll see exactly how
I
far
don't
that
think
goes.
so, actually. I don't
I
think so.
mean, we can speculate. Like I can argue that it's been overinvested. I can also argue there's still so much potential. The one thing I will say though, we have Claude kinds of tools, and like we're all looking forward to like the vibe coding. Oh, it's never been easier and that sort of thing. But I would have expected an explosion of awesome apps to be going along with it, and it doesn't necessarily feel like we have much better software, even though we supposedly have way better tools. So something about that is making me a little bit suspicious. But it might also just be that the apps that are being built that I'm not the target audience for, because I can imagine that because. Let's say you have something awesome
Yeah.
for dentists. That can still be an awesome CRUD app that you could build with Claude, but I'm not a dentist, so you know.
You're like, wow, there's a lot of new cool dentistry management apps. You're right. I
I
haven't
mean,
even
so
noticed
if a
those.
dentist can now
Yeah.
program, right? Like I do believe in the story that as a dentist, you might be best equipped to write an app for dentists, right? And
Yeah.
if they're now more empowered to maybe do some stuff with code, I mean, there's a story there that every single niche profession will have someone who can do enough Claude to make the app for that profession. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
will
It
tell.
used
But
to be that you have to have a programming skill and a little bit of, let's say, dentistry experience to like build the right sort of specialized vertical. And now I think it maybe is reversed. You need a lot of dentistry and a little bit of coding skill to go along with an AI.
yeah, the character sheet used to be 80 points here, 20 points there, and now it's 80 points there and 20 points here.
Yes,
That's the
exactly. That's
yeah.
exactly what I was thinking. Like, I think maybe that's actually shifted until you said that. I've never really thought about it, but it just may be. I do want to point out for people listening, we're not going to really talk too much about like using agentic tools to write code for us. Like we have been speculating about this theoretical dentist. But what instead we're going to do is we're going to talk to you, Vincent, about how can I use an LLM like a library or an API to add functionality, features, behaviors to an existing data science tool or to an existing web app or whatever it is we're building, right?
Yeah. So the also people might probably know it, but I made a course for Talk Python, of course, and we're going to talk about some of those details. But the idea for that course was not necessarily like how can I use LLMs to build me software. It's more how can I build software that also uses LLMs under the hood? Like if I have an app that makes a summary, how can I make sure the summary is reliable? And basically get the ball rolling on those building blocks. That's what that course is about. That's also probably going to be the main bones of this topic, as opposed to dentist Bob and his ambitions to make a new tech startup.
Exactly. We're going to grow new teeth if we just could get the software right. No, yeah. So how do you do that? And we're going to talk about that. Before, I just want to give you a chance before we really dive too far into the details of how we make that work. Is just give people a sense of what you've been up to lately. You've done a lot of cool stuff with calmcode.io. I can see your YouTube game is growing strong here, and you've been doing a lot of data science at Marimo. Like, yeah,
Right.
what's
Yeah.
new?
So we haven't spoken in a year, so maybe we should catch up. So long story short, Calm Code is still a project that I maintain. It's basically 99% free educational content on Python. That thing is just gonna maintain itself. Super happy to keep maintaining it. The main thing I'm doing with that nowadays is just every 2 months I switch cloud providers just because I can, and then I can sort of see what it's like on the other side. So that's the thing that I do. From Comcode, though, I figured I might also start a YouTube channel, and that ended up being a YouTube channel where I still talk about Python stuff, but I mainly talk about these fancy ergonomic keyboards because I had a couple of RSI issues. In a year's time, I went from 100 subscribers to 5,000 something. So like this thing kind of took off.
That's awesome.
I actually have sponsors now. So I actually have a couple of companies in Asia sending me their custom boards for me to review. So like that's been like a really fun journey. But since last time we spoke, I also switched employers. So people might have heard of Jupyter before. Like that's an environment in Python where you can do interactive things. And I work now for a company that makes Marimo, which is a alternative, a very likable one. It does work completely differently. One of the main things that attracts people to it is the fact that these kinds of notebooks are Python files under the hood. They're also a little bit more interactive. You can do more rapid prototyping with UI. You can blend Python with it very nicely. So I will say, like, all of my rapid prototyping, especially with LLMs, I do that in Marimo nowadays, just so you can blend Python with UIs very easily. And there's demos on the site that people can go ahead and check out. But that's also the second YouTube channel I made this year. I do a lot of stuff for Marimo. I'm a little bit more on the like growth side of things than like the hardcore engineering side of things. I still make a lot of plugins for Marimo, of course, but that's a little bit more of what I do nowadays. Making sure that people learn about Marimo. It's you can do things in a notebook now that you couldn't think of before. I write my command line apps in a notebook nowadays, and because it's actually not just because I can, but because it's convenient too. So we'll talk a little bit about that later when we talk about LLMs, but that's effectively the short story of what I've been doing last year.
Nice. All right. I am a fan of Marimo. It really...
Happy to hear it.
Yeah. I did a data science course this year, just enough Python and software engineering for data scientists. Like, what could you bring from the software engineering side to like sort of make your data engineering, data science stuff a little more reliable? But I was right on the fence of should I use this or should I not? Because I think it's clearly better, but at the same time, I also want to use what people are using. So I didn't quite go for it, but the UI is fantastic. The reproducibility, reliability of it, where it uses the abstract syntax tree or concrete, whatever, to understand relationships across cells so they don't get out of sync potentially. I think it's really nice. I had Akshay on the show, who you work with also, to talk about it.
The one thing in Jupyter that's, let me maybe start by saying Jupyter is still a really cool project. Like if I think back of the last decade, like all the good that project has brought to my career, not just directly as a user, but also indirectly, all the algorithms that got invented simply because we had a good enough like interactive environment suddenly, which we never had before. It's done wonders. So like we should definitely be thankful.
And I'm not bashing on it either. Definitely.
No, but I do always want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due, because the project had a lot of impact. But there is this really annoying thing with Jupyter, though. Besides, like, you can be a bit grumpy about the file format, sure. But the one thing that's very annoying is you can write down x is equal to 10, and then have all sorts of cells below it that depend on x. You could then delete the cell, and the notebook will not complain to you about it. Even though if anyone else tries to rerun the notebook, X is gone, it won't run, and your notebook is broken, and you can't share the thing anymore. And nowadays, fast forward like many years later, and we've got stuff like UV now, so we can add metadata to a Python file to add dependencies. And oh, wait, because Marimo is a Python file, we can add dependencies to the notebook. That makes it super reproducible. There's just all this stuff that you can rethink now, simply because we have a good notebook format that is still a Python file. Like that's really the killer feature here. We can talk more about it if you like, but I can talk for ages about this topic. Just warning you. One final thing, maybe also for the software engineering side of things, because you did mention it. Just to give an example of something we added recently. If you have a cell in Marimo, and there's a function in there that starts with test underscore, we will automatically assume it's a PyTest. So you can actually add unit tests to your notebook as well. And then if you say Python notebook.py, then PyTest will just run all the tests for you, even though you can also run the tests in line in your CI/CD as well. So there's all sorts of these Python-specific things that we can add, again, because it's just a Python file.
Yeah, it's sort of the second mover advantage or nth mover advantage, or n is greater than 1, where you see, okay, that was awesome. Maybe this was a little bit of a rough edge, and what would we do to work around that or smooth it out, right?
Well, and also we're also lucky that we're born in the age of UV. I gotta say, like a lot of like quality of life improvements to a notebook, a lot of that is also due to the fact that UV is around. That's definitely a huge help as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw on, gosh, where was it? Speaking of Reddit, I saw on it's like slash R learn Python or slash R Python. I don't, one of the slash R's with a Python substring. Someone asks, what Python package manager would you use now? And it was just like,
UV,
how many
UV
times can
Infinity.
you say UV in
Yeah.
the feedback comments? I mean, it was someone new who wasn't not sure, right? They've seen all the different ones, and yeah. So
I mean, the coolest comparison I've seen, I think it was a tweet someone posted, but like, it definitely, like, suppose you're in the data field right now. Like, what are the tools 10 years ago? What are the tools now? It definitely does feel like, okay, before we had pip, now we have UV. Before we had pandas, now we have polars. Before we had matplotlib, now we have Altair, and before we had Jupyter, now we've got Marimo. You can kind of see a generational shift, not just on the
yeah,
notebook side of things, but like on the package manager, on the data frame library. We're all learning from the previous generation, and it kind of feels like.
yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing time. Every single day in Python is just more exciting than the day before.
Yeah. Although I should also mention, like, especially with the polars thing, there's a fair bit of Rust too. That also makes a difference.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So before fly by, I mean, you talked a bit about your YouTube channel. You review the ergonomic keyboards. You have, for those people who are just listening, not watching, your background is super nice. Your bona fides are solid here,
Yeah.
but you got a bunch of different ones. And I personally also, I don't. You might even just kick me out of the club if I
No,
showed you
that's
this,
the
but
Microsoft Sculpt, right?
the
That's that one.
Microsoft Sculpt Ergonomic, and I like it so much because I can take this little bottom thing off, and it's like razor thin if I could rotate and reverse, and jam it in my backpack and take it with me. But I've also had RSI issues for 25 years or something, and it was really bad. And I switched. I used to type on like laptops and stuff, and I switched to just something like this, and I could type 10 hours a day and it's no problem. Whereas before, if I were to forced to type full on a laptop, I would probably be like unable to work in weeks, if not a week. It's so
we
bad.
uh, we had an offsite in San Francisco, so I was there like 2 weeks ago. A lot of fun, but like I'm not going to bring like airport security is going to look at this and wonder what kind of weird alien device this is, right? So I figured, okay, I'll leave those at home, just bring my normal laptop, and after a week, I'm feeling it in my wrist again. Like
It's not good. It's not
yeah,
good.
it's something to take serious. Although I will also say, like, because the kid was sick and the wife was sick, so I wasn't able to do a whole lot of exercise at home. Also do exercise. So that also totally helps. If I had to, like,
Yeah.
sure, buy an ergonomic keyboard if you like. Programmatic keyboards, they're great. But if you're going to do that as an excuse not to do exercise, you're doing it wrong. That's the one
Yeah.
thing I do want to add to that.
There's lots of stretches you can do. Taking breaks matters. Exercise matters. But I think those keyboards are an essential feature.
They
not-
do totally help, and also it's not sometimes it's not so much a healing measure; it's more of a preventative measure.
Yes, 100%. And I would like to put this message out just to everyone listening who is young, absolutely indestructible. Please, I know they're a bit of a pain in the butt with the weird curviness. It is so worth it to just say, I've never had any RSI issues. I just use this weird keyboard and people make fun of me, but I don't care, right? You know, that is a better thing than like, I'm working on it.
Yeah,
Because
or
it only
like,
hurts, so, you know?
well, another thing that's also, especially now that we've got stuff like Claude, right? I just want, if I can point out like one thing on that front. So these ergonomic keyboards, you can often program them as you see fit. So you can say, like, if I hit this key, it's K, but if I hold it down, it becomes Command, or whatever you like. But it also means that you can map macros or shortcuts. So whenever I hit this button, an app called Mac Whisper boots up. That's going to record my
I love
voice.
Mac Whisper. Love
Yeah,
it.
and then there's alternative variants for it. I'm sure you've got stuff for Linux as well. But the main thing it does is just really good speech to text. And then whenever I'm done talking, it's just immediately going to paste whatever I'm in. So, that's actually very nice, because now the keyboard shortcut is just me holding my thumb down instead of some sort of weird like claw I got to eject to my keyboard. And suddenly it doesn't necessarily become a convenience thing. It also becomes kind of a power user thing. Like, you can really customize your computer experience if you can really map everything to your keyboard just the way that you like. It's like having Vim, but for all the apps out there.
Okay, that's very neat. Yeah, I've remapped caps lock to my activate Mac Whisper. So if I hit caps lock and hold this down, then I can dictate and I know computers have had dictation for a long time, but it's been really bad, right? The built-in dictation to Mac OS or Windows isn't great, especially when you try to talk acronyms like, hey, do PyPI, and it's like,
Yeah, Mac Whisper. No, but Mac Whisper is it's not like all the way there, but I will say it surprised me in quality a few times, definitely.
yeah, yeah. And that app, you can go in and actually set replacements. Like if you ever think you're going to write this, write that instead. So I've done that with like Talk Python because it always just turns it into camel case combined. I'm like, no, those are two separate words, or whatever. You
Oh,
can sort of customize it a bit.
yeah, and I think my favorite one, I think Mac Whisper actually gets this one wrong still, but whenever I write scikit-learn, which is a very
Yeah, yeah.
popular like data science package, it always translates it to psychologists learn, which
They can put that
can't
as a
blame you,
correction
but
in there. Like, I never want you to ever write this series of words because if I have to, I'll just type it the one time. It's not my common thing.
it's
Right?
well, so I'm not. It's one of these moments where actually I type scikit-learn often enough where it's like almost becoming the issue. So I'm like at the verge of adding these rules manually for all these weird open source packages that I interact with. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
but take ergonomics serious, people. That's the one thing I want to say. You don't always have to buy a super expensive keyboard. If you want to explore like programmatic keyboards because you can customize things, that's an excellent reason. But like take a break and do exercises and just be healthy. That's how you win a marathon.
Yes, that's for sure. Now, this is not the Vincent's keyboard review marathon, but let's wrap it up with what if you could take any keyboard hanging around on your wall there, which one would you use?
Well, so there's four. There's four pairs of these, so it's probably this one. There's a couple of other boards that are great too. This board is not the board I would recommend to everyone, but if you have serious RSI issues, I do think the Glove 80 is your best bet. It's simple in terms of the shape. It is probably the most ergonomic shape for most hand sizes.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, let's switch over to talking about programming
Yes.
LLMs with LLMs, not programming LLMs. And I guess, like you already called out, you wrote this course called LLM Building Blocks for Python. Super fun course, really neat. It's pretty short and concise. And it really talks about how can you reliably add some kind of LLM into your code. I guess what you're talking about in this course really applies regardless of whether it's a self-hosted one or it's OpenAI or Anthropic, right? You can have there's some choices you can make on which LLM to use, right?
So the main idea I had with the course was like an LLM is a building block at some point, but it's very unlike a normal building block when you're dealing with code, because normally with code, you put something into a function and like one thing comes out. But in this particular case, you put a thing into a function, you have no idea up front what's going to come out. And not only that, but you put the same thing in twice and something else might come out as well. So that means that you're going to want to think about this tool a bit more defensively. It's a weird building block. It's like you have to put a moat around it because otherwise the building block's going to do stuff you don't want it to do. Almost. And like some of that is syntax, some of that is how do you think about these Lego bricks, and some of it is also just what is good methodology in general to like statistically test if the thing is doing roughly what you want it to do.
Nice.
That's the gist of it. But
yeah, cool. Yeah, I pulled out a couple of ideas, concepts, and tools that you talked about throughout the course. And you don't have to have taken the course to have these things be useful. I just thought it might be fun to riff on some of the things you touched on here.
The main thing I think will be fun is it's been half a year, I think. It will be fun how much of it is still intact. I think most of it still definitely is, but it might be fun to sort of see if we can find anything that might be dated, just to see if the world has moved on quickly. I think there's only one thing, but we can. I'm just kind of curious. Let's see.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep our radar up for that. It's definitely something that's more changing quicker and has a higher likelihood of being dated. But I think it holds up pretty well.
Yeah. Like okay. So we. Like one of the things I remember emphasizing is you want to do some stuff like caching. So like if let's say you've got a function and you use an LLM for it, and let's keep it simple. Let's say we're just making summaries. So talk Python episode paragraph goes in, single sentence is supposed to come out, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you might have a loop, and you're gonna do like maybe one pass, try one LLM with one type of setting, try another LLM with different type of settings to generate all this data. It would be a shame that you're gonna use an LLM, which is kind of an expensive compute thing, if you put the same input in by accident and then you incur the cost twice. Like that would really stink. So one of the things you always want to do is like think a little bit about caching. And there's a Python library called disk cache that I've always loved to use, and I highly recommend people have a look at it. I think, Michael, you've also used it in one of your courses before.
Oh my gosh, we have to talk about this. It's so good.
It is so good. It is SQLite. It is so good.
It is even better than SQLite. It is unbelievably good. And I have you to thank. I knew about it, but like, whatever. And then after I saw you use it, I'm like, genius. This is genius.
So good. Yes. No, so it's like having the LRU. It's like having the LRU disk cache, but it's also on disk. So if you were to restart Python, you still have everything in cache, basically. And it's a SQLite database, so you can always inspect all the stuff that's in there. If you wanted to, you can also do fancy things like add a time to live to every single object. And this is something you could do in a Docker container for a web app. But the main thing that's always nice when you're dealing with LLMs is you always want to be able to say in hindsight, like, okay, how did this LLM compare to that one? You want to compare outputs, and then just writing a little bit of a decorator on top of a function is the way to put it in SQLite, and you're just done with that concern. That is just amazing. And we're using disk cache directly. If you're using LLM by Simon Willison from the command line, there's also a mechanism there so that you can get it into SQLite if you wanted to. So that's like also a feature you could consider. But
of course, he's going to put something in SQLite. Like he couldn't write a library that doesn't put something in SQLite, given his data set project.
It's Simon Willison. He'll put SQLite in SQLite if it's a Sunday. Yeah.
Exactly.
But this cache, if you haven't used this cache before, it definitely feels like one of these libraries that, because I have it in my back pocket, it just feels like I can tackle more problems. That's the short story of it. And the course uses it in a very sort of basic fashion, but knowing that everything you do in an LLM can only needs to happen once, if you're interested in using it once, that just saves you so much money.
Yeah, and it's so useful. So one of the things you did in the course is you said, all right, the key for the value that we're going to store is going to be the model settings, and the prompt. Yes. As a tuple, right? Something along those lines. And then you use that as the key. So if any of those variations change, does the model change? Do the settings change? Or like anything, that's a totally different request. And then you just store the response, and then boom. If you ask the exact same question of the same model with the same prompt with the same settings, why do you need to go and wait 10 seconds and burn money and environmental badness when you could literally within a microsecond get the answer back?
Yeah, and there's also a fancy thing, and there's a trick you can do on top. So sometimes you want to say, well, there's a statistical thing also happening. So sometimes I want to have one input and actually store maybe 10 outputs, so I can look at all these outputs, maybe annotate that later. And the way you solve that is you just add an integer to the tuple, basically, and then you're also able to store many outputs if you really like.
Right. This is the fourth one, the eighth one, whatever. Yeah, cool.
So it's flexible.
Yeah, and it does a whole bunch of neat things that are really, really wild. Like, so it looks like just, hey, I put this value into it, right, and it stores it. It's really powerful because across application executions. So like maybe if you're caching that response in your notebook and whatever, you're doing some testing, if you come back later, you start the notebook back up or restart the kernel or whatever, like it's not like an LRU cache. It remembers because it's stored somewhere in like temporary storage in a local SQLite file, which is amazing. It also has interesting ideas. I'm not sure really where they are, but like it has different kinds of caches as well. So maybe you're storing a ton of stuff in there, and so it'll do basically built-in sharding across multiple SQLite files, and it's really, really good. This is a deep library. This is not just it's like LRU but to disk.
So the cool thing about that library is it really does go deep. But if you really just want to use it as a dictionary, you can. That's the thing that I really love about it. For all intents and purposes, you just treat it as a dictionary and you're good. Or use it as a decorator on a function, and again, you're good. Mm-hmm. Again, it's one of those little hacks where, if you just know about the library, you just become more productive at typical Python stuff.
Yeah. I'll give you a place where I'm using it, actually. I use it on some LLM stuff, like where I'm programming against an LLM for exactly the reason you did. Because if you have the same inputs, don't ask the question again. You just, here's the answer. It's real fast. But if you go over to like Talk Python, let's see here. Go over to the guests, for example, right? So there's a bunch of guests, and here we have Vincent. Not that Vincent. Not that Vincent. There you are, that Vincent.
All these Vincents.
they're all over the.
Yeah.
I have like 560 guests or something. There's a lot, but in here you'll notice that if you go into the view the source on this thing, like all over the place, anytime there's a picture, it'll have this little cache busting ID on the end. And that's fine when it's served locally because you can just look at the file and go, just the file still has the same cache at startup. But if it comes from like a S3 blob storage, and the app restarts, how do I know what that is? Like, it has to go and it would have to re-download the entire contents of the blob. So check this out.
Yeah,
so I just added. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this feels like there's something between a proper CDN and then getting it from S3. Like, there are these moments when you want to have something that's kind of in between, and then this cache could actually be a good solution for it.
Exactly. So what the site does is it has a disk cache, and anytime it says, "Hey, I want to like refer to a resource that's external," it'll download it once, compute the hash, and then store it in the disk cache. Unless you change something behind it. And so it's like automatically using this, and it makes everything like there's never stale resources, and it's instantly fast, even if they're served out of like something remote like S3 equivalent.
And do you also do a
so
time
good,
to
man.
live?
It's so good.
It's also,
Yes, I do.
Time to live is also like every day it's allowed to refresh once or something like that, I suppose.
For the S3 stuff, I don't, because I've set up all the admin functions that if I ever change one through the admin, it deletes it out of the cache.
Gotcha.
So it's like it's internally consistent, but for like other things, like if it parses something out of the description, which sits set in the dictionary, that stuff, it's just got a time to live of like a day or something, and it's got like there's a bunch of those. So I'm using all these different places, and wow, it's so good. I just wanted to say thank you because I knew we were going to talk about it today.
It's one of the. If it was part of the standard library, I would honestly not be surprised. Like, that's also the story with that. But yeah, SQLite is great. Disk cache is great. It feels like a dictionary, but it gives you so much more. It's great. That's the only thing I can say about it.
So people are probably like, wait, I thought we were talking about LLMs.
Yeah, we are.
I think this is one of the interesting things is because there's all these interesting tools, and it's not even about using agentic AI, and it's not like there's really cool libraries and tools that you can just apply to this LLM problem, but also apply everywhere else, right?
It's one of those. So it's one thing I have found with like LLMs in general if you're building software with it. On the one end, I think it can be very helpful if you're like a proper like senior engineer kind of a person, because then you know about things like, oh, I want a cache, and what's a pragmatic cache. And you can also pick Redis, by the way. If you would have used Redis for this, that could have also worked. Just that I think
it would have been fine.
Yeah, it would have been fine.
But you know what I like is there's no servers. I don't have to deal with the servers. It's a file.
It's very true.
And it just keeps it simpler.
It's totally true. But the point I wanted to get at here, like your previous experience as a proper engineer will still help you write good LLM software. However, from a similar perspective, I also think that we do have this generation of like data scientists and maybe data engineer, data analyst kind of person, like thinking analytically, being quite critical of the output of an algorithm. And that's also like a good bone to have in this day and age, I would say. Because if I've built a couple of recommenders back in my day, like it's been a decade now, but like one of the things you do learn when you're building a recommender is that you're stuck with this problem of, hey, I gave this user this recommendation and they clicked it. Would they have clicked this other thing if I would have recommended it to them? And suddenly you're dealing with a system that's like really stochastic and hard to predict. And you have to be kind of strict about the way you test and compare these different algorithms. And you want to think twice about the way you A/B test these things. And, oh, actually, just like disk cache is useful as a tool, having a little bit of like methodology statistically in your mind will also help you, because comparing LLMs, a lot of it is doing evaluations.
Sure.
And like being kind of strict about that. And that's also what I try to do in the course. I try to just show you that if you're really strict about evaluations, then you can also learn that for some problems, you're still better off using scikit-learn, because you just evaluate it and then you learn that like the number is better on the scikit-learn side of things.
That's when you feel like, oh, maybe I did it wrong, or you paid a bunch of money to run expensive, slow LLMs, and you're like, I would just use a predictor.
Well, So it's funny you say that. So I've actually been talking to a bunch of people that do LLMs at companies here in the Netherlands, and you go to a PyData, you go to a conference, and you give them just enough beer so they're honest. That kind of a situation.
The NDA curtain opens just a little, or whatever.
Plausible deniability is the name of the game in this one. Yes, but then the stories you hear, which I did find somewhat encouraging, is they do all kind of go, well, there's budget now to do AI stuff, which means that we try out all the different LLMs and we like invest in evals and that sort of a thing. And funnily enough, we also put some base models in there, like as a standard benchmark that we should beat. And it kind of, I've heard a story a bunch of times now that because of the hype around LLMs and AI, after it was implemented, after it did all the benchmarks, it turns out that AI is the reason that scikit-learn is now in production in a bunch of places. And it's also the similar thing with like Spacey, because what a lot of people do learn is that, hey, if the Spacey model or like the lightweight model, so to say, is like somewhat equivalent to the LLM model, after you give it like enough training data, which you do want to have either anyway, because you need that for evaluations. Well, typically those models are more lightweight and they will always produce the same output. Same thing goes in, same prediction will always come out. And you can really fence it off, have it on like a normal VM. That's also totally fine. Oh, and another benefit, it's super lightweight to run. You just need a Lambda function and you're good, as opposed to like a GPU or like a huge cloud bill or something like that. So some of the stories that I'm hearing do suggest that, okay, these LLMs are also helping out like standard data science work, if it were, if only because management now really does want to be serious about the investment and really wants to do the experiments.
Yeah, very interesting, because you could say, we're going to use, your mandate is to add AI, and then you go user like, well, we got to see how well it's working, so we tested it, and then it turns out
we have to compare it to something of a benchmark, and then the benchmark
exactly. The benchmark's fast and effectively free, and about as good. So we're good. We're just going to do that. I think it's it's fine.
Some organizations need like mandate from above in order to get something done, and this LLM craze, if nothing else, does seem to have caused the mandate from above.
I'm sure it has.
So that's something I would keep in the back of your mind as well, dear listener. Like sometimes that mandate can also give you permission to do other things.
Yeah, not working for a large enterprise type company for quite a while. I imagine I'm pretty blind to how that is transforming, directives from the top. But I'm sure bosses are like, I'm using ChatGPT and it's so much better than our software. What are we going to do about that?
Yeah, it's I'm in the developer tooling space, so I still talk to big companies and small companies as well. And you do notice that big companies, they work differently than small companies. That is certainly true, for better or worse. Like there's also good reasons why bigger companies. Like if I'm a bank, like I'm pretty sure it's a good idea to also have some rules that I have to abide by, which
it is. No, I'm just thinking more of like how disconnected is the higher level management from the product, and like how much do they just like dictate a thing. Okay, so let's talk about some of the tools. One of the things you primarily focused on was using Simon Willison's LLM library. Tell us about this thing.
So the funny thing about that library is that it's actually kind of more meant as a command line utility. I think that's kind of the entry point that he made. But then he also just made sure there was some sort of a Python API around it. And after looking at that library, and also after playing around with all these other libraries, and I'm about to say this, but this is a compliment, I just found the LLM library by Simon Willison by far to be the most boring. And I mean that really in a good way. It's just unsurprising, only does a few things. The few things that it does is just in a very predictable way. And especially if you're doing rapid prototyping, what I felt was just kind of nice is that it does feel like you have building blocks that allow you to build very quickly. But it doesn't necessarily feel like you're dealing with abstractions that can sort of wall you in at some point. So for a hello world getting started, just do some things in a very Pythonic way, this boring library really did the trick. And I'm also happy to report it's still a library that I use. Like it's still definitely a library in my tool belt. Whenever I want to do something real quick, that is definitely a tool that I refer to. And one of the things that
is it kind of a is it kind of an abstraction across the different LLMs and that kind of stuff? Like if I want to talk to Anthropic versus OpenAI, it doesn't matter.
Yes. So the way that this is built is also, I think, with good taste. So what you don't want to do as a library is say, like, I'm gonna basically support every library under the sun. Because as a single maintainer, in the case of Simon Willison, you're just gonna drown in like all these different providers. So what he went for instead was a plugin ecosystem. Now the downside of a plugin ecosystem is that then you defer the responsibility of like maintaining a plugin for a specific source to another maintainer. But you might get someone who works at Mistral to make the Mistral plugin, and you might get someone who works at OpenRouter to make the OpenRouter plugin, etc. So you do distribute the workload in kind of a nice way, and all the bigger models are definitely supported. So the Anthropic and the OpenAI ones, like those are just always in there. But you will also definitely find some of the more exotic ones that they will also just have a plugin themselves. Now, one thing that also helps under the hood is that OpenAI has a standard under the hood. Their SDK has become a bit of a standard across industry. So you can also reuse the OpenAI stuff. It would not surprise me at all that if you were just to change like a URL in a setting, that you can also connect to Mistral via the OpenAI objects. I would have to double check, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that is a very common way of just like, you know what, we're all going to just adopt open. It's a little like S3. Like when I was saying S3 earlier, I was actually talking to DigitalOcean, but it doesn't matter. I'm just still using Boto 3 to talk to it.
Yeah, it does feel weird. Like, oh, you want to use DigitalOcean? Well, you have to download an SDK from a competing cloud provider, and then you can.
Exactly, it's so weird.
But I mean, the thing I do find that it's just a little bit funny here is like technically this thing is meant to be used from the command line. It just happens that it's written in Python, and it just happens that also it has a decent Python API, and that's the thing I actually end up using more than stuff from the command line. But that's because I do a lot of things in notebooks. So the stuff that I tend to use is a little bit more on the Python side.
Sure, of course. Same here. Yeah, I don't think I would use it very much from the command line. But, you know, I can see using it as a step in a series of things happening on the command line, like some sort of orchestration, like XY, ask the LLM Z, you know?
Well, the main thing I actually use it for from the command line is you can do a git diff on whatever you're working on and then sort of pipe that through to the LLM to make the commit message. Like there are like these little moments like that so where you do want to have a little automation maybe in CI, and like being able to do this from the command line is definitely useful. It's just not the thing I use it for most, or like if I use it that way, it's a thing I automate once and then never really look at it. But the interaction really for me is more in the notebook.
Yeah, that's very, very cool library, and definitely neat for.
Like one thing that might be fun to point out, because that's something I built, I think, around the same time. Like if you were to type into Google smart funk and then my GitHub alias Koning, Koaning, because the little did it. Okay, you already had it open. Good man.
No, I'm really good with Google. Actually, I use a start page these days, but I'm sure I could find it there.
Oh, okay. Like you're well, you have an ergonomic keyboard, so there you go. Quick typing.
I'm already.
Yeah. No, so like a thing I was able to build on top of the thing that Simon Willison made, and it's something that appears in the course as well. But if you could scroll down, and then I think I have an example just below that. Yeah, there you go. So basically what this function does is you can add a decorator. You just have a normal Python function. The inputs, you just put types on it. So you can say like this input is a string, this input is an integer, or what have you. You then add a decorator that says what backend you want to use. So GPD4 or anything that Simon Willison supports. And then the doc string is the prompt you give to the LLM. So you can do something like, hey, I have a function that accepts a term called paragraph. That's a string. And then the doc string of the function says, summarize this. And then lo and behold, you now have a Python function that can do summaries.
I see. And the doc string can be effectively a Jinja template text,
yes.
Right?
If you wanted to, it could be a Jinja template. Alternatively, what you can also do is you can also say, well, what the function returns is the prompt. That's also something you can do.
Got it.
But like, this is just a very quick hack for like some of the stuff that I want to do real quick. I don't necessarily recommend other people to use this, but this is something you can build on top of the LLM library from Simon Willison. So if you want to make your own syntactic sugar, your own abstractions, it's definitely something that you can also do. And also, like, again, the name of the game here is like quick iteration. So also feel free to like think of your own tools now and again, but you want the base layer to be as boring as possible. And Simon Willison's library, again, does that in a good way.
Right. Just don't make me think about the details. Let me swap out the model providers, and which is actually doing quite a bit, but not conceptually.
Yeah. So so again, like if you never, like, one thing I do think at this point in time, if you've not played around with this software stuff already, like, I do recommend maybe doing that sooner rather than later. And I think Simon Willison's approach, if you're already a Python person, is probably the simplest way to get started. But um, I do want to warn people in the sense of, these are just tools. Tools are useful. Tools are great. But at some point, it's not so much about the tools that you use, but more about how you think about the tools. Like the way you interact with these tools is not so like, you can use a hammer in many different ways, but the way you think about a hammer is like also equally important.
Yeah, 100%. So speaking of thinking about how this goes, one of the challenges is, so let's just take this example here. It says, the example on your smartphone GitHub README, it says, generate summary, take some text. It says, generate a summary of the following text, text.
Yes,
Super
text.
straightforward. But what if you said, change the prompt a little bit and said, give me all of the Python libraries discussed in the following markdown content?
Right.
And do you want a novella back, like a novel back, when really what you want is like, I want a list of strings and URLs or whatever? Like, how do I get programmability instead of just chatability, I guess?
Yeah. So the thing that Simon Willison's library does allow you to do is you are able to say, well, I have a prompt over here, but the output that I'm supposed to get out, well, that has to be a JSON object of the following type, and then you can use Pydantic. So you can do something like, well, I expect a list of strings to come out over here in the case that you're trying to detect Python libraries or Pokemon names or what have you. Or you can say, well, there's more like a classification. I believe you can pass a literal with like only these values, and that's then also constrained. And the reason that you can do that is some of these LLMs are actually trained on specific tasks. One of these tasks could be tool calling. Another one of these tasks that are trained for these days is that you have, I have to say the right word here, something output, structured output. So that the LLM can sort of give a guarantee that if you declare that you get a list of strings out, that you actually do get a list of strings out. And that's something that these things are typically trained for. So that's something you can do. If you're using open source models, definitely check them out. They're cool. But like quality does vary, is what I will say. So that's something to always keep in the back of your mind. And also, the more complex you make your Pydantic object, like if you make like a nested thing of a nested thing of a nested thing, at some point the LLM is going to have a bit of trouble with that. Even though Pydantic is of course great, but like you make it harder for the LLM to do the right thing at some point. But that's also a thing that definitely you want to use if you're doing stuff with software. Like the really cool thing about Pydantic is you can say, I expect something that looks like this to come out, and you can force an LLM to also actually do that. Like you will get the right types that come out. The contents might still be maybe a bit spooky, but like at least you get the right types out, which makes it a lot more convenient to write software.
You can say, I can loop over the things that sent back, and you're not into like vague text parsing land.
Well, the main thing you get is, I remember when the first OpenAI models sort of started coming out, I worked back at Explosion. We made this tool called Spacey there. And one of the things that we were really bummed out about was LLMs can only really produce text. So this structural, like if you want to detect a substring in a text, for example, which is a thing that Spacey is really good at, then you really want to guarantee, well, I'm going to select a substring that actually did appear in the text. I want to know exactly where it starts and exactly where it ends, and that's the span that I want to select. So normally in NLP, like text comes in and structured information comes out. But here come these LLMs and text comes in and text comes out. And then you got to figure out a way to guarantee that structured output actually comes out. So that's a thing that the LLM providers also acknowledge. So that's something that they're actually training these models for. But that's, I think it's a lot better these days, but it was definitely a huge part of the problem like 3 to 4 years ago when these things just got started. It was super annoying.
So if you use Pydantic, you define a Pydantic model that derives from Pydantic.base model. You put the type information, fields, etc. And then what does it do? Does it say, kind of use the schema generation that Pydantic already has? Like people are familiar with Fast API. If you set the response model, it'll do open API spec, which I believe just comes more or less from Pydantic, right?
I could be. I think it's a JSON standard in the end. Like, you know how you can generate JSON schemas as well? I think
Yeah.
it's that spec that is using under the hood that is then also giving off to OpenAI or what have you. So I think in the end it's a JSON spec, but I could be wrong.
Right,
in the
but
details there.
it's driven by the Pydantic model, and then
Yes.
that's given as part of the prompt. Like, here's my question. Your answer will look like this, and it uses the Pydantic, something to that effect.
Yeah, there's one small caveat there in the sense that you can also add custom types with Pydantic. So you can do something like, well, this is a non-negative integer, for example. And you can definitely imagine that, especially with these validations that you can write in Python, not everything that you can come up with there is going to be supported by this JSON spec. So you are going to get some of these weird edge cases maybe where Pydantic can do more than what the JSON spec can do on your behalf. There is a really cool library, though, called Instructor that actually...
Yes, I was just thinking about that.
So what they do is actually kind of cute. So the impression I have is that they acknowledge that Pydantic can actually do a bit more than what the JSON spec can do, especially because the validator that you write can really be a custom whatever thing you care about. So what they do as a trick is they say, well, if the LLM gives me something back that doesn't get like validated by Pydantic, we take the error message together with the thing that we got back, make a new prompt to the LLM and just ask it again. And see, maybe now with the hint, it is able to give us the proper structure back.
It sounds silly, but anyone who's done agentic AI stuff, like, Claude or whatever, that's a lot of the magic where you say, it tried this. Oh, I see. I actually forgot an import. Oh, I see. I passed the wrong commit. Let me try again a different way. Oh, now it's working. And, I think there's a lot of potential with that.
So, well, it's definitely true. The one thing I think is safe to say at this point, although I'm not a researcher, right? So, like, don't pin me down on this. That library did originate from an early era of LLMs when this structured stuff wasn't really being trained for just yet.
Yeah.
And it is my impression that LLMs have gotten a fair bit better at this structured task at this point. So you could argue that maybe that library is solving a solved problem with the technique that they've got. But I still don't want to discount it because you... inevitably, at some point, you might want to go for like a very lightweight model that you can run locally that isn't fine-tuned on the structured output task.
Yeah.
And in that situation, this technique can actually do a lot of good. Like, you might be prompting the LLM for like 3 times, but you might be able to get away with that because the model is just so much lighter because it doesn't have to do all those tasks that those big LLMs are trained for.
Right. Especially if you're running it on your machine or you're self-hosting the model. You're not like, oh, it's just going to cost us so much money. It's just, it'll take a little longer, but it's fine.
Yeah, so like there's Llama support for Instructor. There's also Llama support for the LLM library from Simon Willison, by the way. But yeah, like this is you can definitely imagine this is still going to be relevant with the Llama stuff going forward. And also it's a reasonable trick if you think about it. Like it's the main thing that we do is we just add a retry mechanic to the structured outputs by using the Pydantic validator effectively.
Yeah. I mean, think about what you probably do. Certainly what I do when I'm working with ChatGPT or something. Gives me a wrong answer. Like, no, this is not what I wanted. This is what I, it's like, oh, okay, I see. And it's kind of automating that more or less.
It's certainly an attempt. Yeah. I do. Yeah. In my experience, I have also seen moments when like it sends the same error back 5 times and then it just kind of fails. So there is also a limit to the retry mechanic.
Sure. It's a little bit like tenacity or stamina.
Exactly.
For APIs or whatever.
It uses tenacity under the hood, if I'm not mistaken. So like there's definitely that mechanism in there.
Nice. Just didn't work. Try it again. It's like turn it off and turn it on again. See if it works now.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, a little more smart than that though, because it does validate and return the error. So super cool.
Yep.
Okay. Have you worked with, I guess, I don't know, higher order programming models? So, I saw Samuel Colvin yesterday talking about Pydantic AI. I saw on X, I saw Sydney Runkle talking about some big release, like a 1.0 release or something at LangChain. What are your thoughts on some of these higher order orchestration libraries?
I mean, the main thing for me, at least, this was a demo I did do with the Pydantic AI one. I do think types are quite powerful when you think of LLMs. There's a live stream you can check on the Marimo YouTube if you're keen to see like the full demo. But let me just sketch you like a problem that used to be really hard. Like 6 years ago, I used to work at this company called Raza. We work on like chatbot software. And like a thing that was really hard is let's say you're a chatbot and you can order a pizza. So you can do things like, yep, that's the one. It's like also one of the Pydantic AI engineers, and he's also the creator of Starlet, by the way. Cool project. Marimo's built on top of Starlet. It's the main maintainer of that project. He deserves to get more high fives from the community, so do want to point it out. Well, let's say you're working on a pizza bot, and okay, someone is ordering a pizza. Suppose you go to the bot and you say, hey, I want to order a pepperoni pizza. Then you can imagine there's a pizza type. And the pizza type says what's the kind of pizza, what's the size of the pizza, and do you want to have extra toppings? And it has to be a list of ingredients, let's say. But if I tell you, hey, you want to have a pepperoni pizza, but I don't know the size yet, well, then I need the LLM to ask a good follow-up question. Okay, how are you going to build that logic? Because that can get quite gnarly quite quickly, especially if, in this case, the pizza is simple. But you can come up with like a complicated object, like a complicated form almost. And
Right. I only need to ask this question if they've answered that one in that way. Right. It could like get really tricky. Yeah.
Well, and then the question is like, how can you actually get the LLM to do this for you? And there's a trick that you can do with the type, because what you can say is, well, the response from the LLM has to be of type pizza or bar string. And then if the prompt says something along the lines of, well, parse the output of the user such that it is a pizza, but then if this validation error occurs, like, oh, how do you express that logic? Well, you can express it with a type. You just say this is a string, or it's the type that I'm actually interested in the pizza. And then the LLM has to figure out, well, is the response either going to be the string where I'm asking the user for missing information, or is it going to be the pizza object? And if it's the pizza object, then the code will actually talk to the backend. So you do get to rethink how typing works because we have LLMs at our disposal now. You can actually have the LLM handle some of that logic as long as your type is like strict about it, or like well defined, I should say. It's a bit of a weird advanced feature of types and LLMs, but I can definitely imagine some of the Pydantic AI stuff does use this trick in order to perform some of the higher order stuff. And maybe you don't need a full framework as long as you are really like deliberate about your types is what that's kind of the mentality I try to have right now. Like let's not worry about like the big framework just yet. If we can just focus on the right types and make sure that all that stuff is kind of sane, then you also keep the abstractions at bay, which is I think also convenient, especially early on.
It sounds a little bit like an analogy you might be able to draw with databases. Like you could have like a really strong structured Postgres or relational database where the database thing, like, aka the AI, is in charge of it. Or you could be using an ODM or ORM where the code will only like accept responses, right? So like, for example, you can get away talking to a document database if you have strongly typed models. If you're just passing dictionaries, you're going to end up in a bad place real quick because something's not going to match, right? So it's kind of like the Pydantic thing is being a check for if it's not quite perfect. I don't know. I feel like there's an analogy there.
There's a bit of an analogy there. The main thing with the LLM is like, oh, how much of the logic do you want to control yourself as a guarantee, and how much would you like the LLM to do it? And like, oh, that's always kind of a struggle. Like, what is the right glue for that? And it turns out that Pydantic is in a very funny, unique position to say, how about we just use types? And that actually just kind of works.
How ironic is that that's such a popular thing coming out of a effectively untyped language?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it's so popular. You know, I think it partly is.
I mean, it's my impression that there's a lot of this stuff also happening on the JavaScript side of things, if I'm honest. Now, for the JavaScript side of things, the argument is, of course, oh, you can also build the web UIs a bit easier and the user experience and like that whole story. But they also do a lot of this validation stuff. I forget the library, but there's also like, I'm learning a little bit of JavaScript now. That like there's actually Pydantic things happening in JavaScript land as well.
Yeah, it's probably Pydantic. It's probably what it is.
Just Dantic or
just Dantic. Yeah, JS Dantic.
Or TypeScript or whatever. But there's also ORM libraries for JavaScript that are like type E, but not like super TypeScript just yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting analogies from the JavaScript space for us. You know, like the whole TypeScript team just rewrote everything in Go, whereas we're seeing a lot of stuff in Python being modified in Rust. Yeah, exactly. So pretty interesting. But let's close this out a little bit with like running some of our own models. Okay, so clearly there's Anthropic, there's OpenAI, there's all the big, huge foundational models. But some of these things we're talking about, it's like this Pydantic schema validation type of thing and so on. Maybe we could, as you said, get away with running a small model, maybe small enough that we could run it ourselves on our servers or on my Mac Mini here, M2 Pro with 32 gigs of RAM. I have the OpenAI 20 billion parameter model running as like my default LLM for any of my code that I write that needs to talk to an LLM.
So, so we actually have a video on the Maroon channel on that one, but okay, go check that out later. But basically, every quarter
Send me
now,
a link. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, no. So I kind of find myself exploring all these different open source LLMs like once every 2 months or so, and then Marimo has a couple of interesting integrations that makes it really easy to either hook into Olama and that's like the only thing I might change on the course that we made. There's now also this service called Open Router. Like, I don't know if you've heard.
Yes, I've heard of it. I've only because I was looking at Klein.bot. Are you familiar with Klein.bot?
Oh yeah, Klein is cool. Klein is really cool. I've been using that for a bit.
Tell people what Klein is real quick.
Yeah, so Klein is basically Copilot for VS Code, but the one thing that they do is they really let you do any model, like just plug it in, and they are really strict about plan mode versus like run mode, if it makes sense. So you really gotta, and the UI is kind of cool. So like every time that you're like planning or doing whatever, you kind of see the progress bar of your context, and then you also see how much money it costs. So you're like always aware of the fact that like, okay, this thing is costing me bucks now, and it's just a refreshing take on GitHub Copilot. And I will say, like you can't do sessions in parallel because it is, I think, at the moment still stuck to the VS Code extension ecosystem.
They do. They just introduced a CLI.
Ah, there you go. There you go.
I bet you can do it with that.
Yeah. So that's also. But the main thing that drew me in was the whole. Oh, they're very strict about plan mode versus Go mode, which I think is definitely super useful. And on top of that, they have some nice UI.
Yeah, it's also real similar to Cursor and others. And I think it's a big selling point is open source, and they don't charge for inference. So you just put in your API key and it just passes through. But you're right, they do have like as it's thinking, it's got a little tick, tick, tick price of this operator. And it's like, oh, it's up to 3 cents, 5 cents. It's I don't know. It's just interesting to watch it go.
You also, it's kind of like the Fibonacci sequence. You kind of realize that it's additive. So it's like, oh, I've spent like $50 now. Oh, and the next problem is going to be $50 plus extra. The next one's going to be like that extra plus half.
It makes you manage your context size real well. So anyway, okay, that's a bit of a diversion, but I think this is like a fun tool to shout out.
No, I agree. So
the reason I brought this up is I saw they were #1 on Open Router. I'm like, wait, what's Open Router?
Yeah, so Open Router is basically you have one API key, and then they will route to any LLM that you like. And one thing that's really cool about it is that if there's a new open source model that you see all at Twitter and YouTube sort of rave about, it'll be on Open Router, and then you can just give it a spin. And if you have, let's say, stuff in your cache, and you've got a couple of functions that you use for evaluation, and you've got a setup for that, then it's just changing a single string to give like a new LLM model a try. And they will make sure everything is nicely routed. And that's like the whole service also basically. I think they add like a 5% fee hike or something like that, but they've got all sorts of GPU providers competing for like the lowest price. So they do all the routing to all the LLM models, but also the open source ones. And that's the main convenient bit, because I might not have, so it's partially that I don't have the biggest GPU for the biggest models, but it's really convenient to just do kind of a for loop. Like, okay, take the 7B model from Quen, the 14B model, and just loop over all of them and see if there's like a sweet spot as far as like quality is concerned and also model size. Like those kinds of experiments become a whole lot simpler if you just have one API that has all the models. And Open Router kind of gets you there.
Yeah. Okay. Very neat.
And that's also why Klein likes using it. So they have a direct connection with Klein. Just in the user interface, you can say, well, I want to have this model from Open Router. Just click, 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 and it's all sort of ready to go.
Yeah.
That's their service.
Okay, very neat. All right, so I mean, maybe for people who haven't run their own models, there's like a couple of options. Like, it sounds like you recommend Olama.
I mean, that's the one that I have used. Like, you've used LM Studio, I think.
I use LM Studio because LM Studio has like this UI for discovering and setting them up and playing with and like configuring them. But then you can just say run in dev mode, and it just runs. And here we go, an OpenAI compatible API endpoint on my local network. And so I can just point anything that can do ChatGPT, I can point it at this, whatever's running there. And I was running the GPT OSS 20 billion one last time I tried. Last time I
There you
changed
go.
it.
Okay. Now, so Olama also has like a very similar thing. My impression is that LM Studio in the end is like pretty similar. It just has a slightly different UI. It's a bit more of an app, I suppose. Like
Yeah, I
Olama
think
is
so.
definitely more of a command line utility. Uh, does the job though, I would say, but it's not doesn't have that much to offer in the UI department.
Yeah, I think if I were ever to try to set it up on my server, I'd probably just do Olama,
Yeah.
maybe inside a Docker or something. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. And not true. Like the one sort of mysterious thing with a lot of these services, like how do they make money? And like I think, like I think I read somewhere that Olama is going to start doing open router kind of stuff as well. So it wouldn't surprise me if they ended up going in that direction. But I mean, there's all sorts of vendors, and there's like another thing I'm also seeing a lot of nowadays, that people use like big models to generate a data set, such that they can take a super tiny model and fine tune on the data that was generated by the big model. And that way, like a future maybe that we might have is that you have a Dutch model that's really good for legal. Maybe we'll have like a super bespoke LM for that at some point, or like an LLM that's like really good at CSS, but only CSS. Like that's also a thing that we might have. And then those models can be really tiny and run on your laptop. And who knows? This is the age we live in.
I certainly can foresee a world like that, where it's like, okay, I'm going to work on a project. Instead of spinning up a general world knowledge model, I'm going to just let it on demand go, okay, I have a CSS question. Well, what framework are you using? I'm using Tailwind. Okay, we're going to spin up the Tailwind LLM model, and we need to ask it a question. And we can shut that. You know what I mean? Like really focused, but then have some kind of orchestrating thing that says, now I got to talk to this. Now let me work with that one. But that could be great.
Yeah, and it might also be a solution to the whole, the time cutoff is January to 2025, and like everything that happened after we have no knowledge about. Like there could also be a way for us to have a system where we just retrain a thing weekly and it's just a diff on top or something like that, right? That's something that could also happen.
Yeah, and if it were small enough, then it would be okay.
Yeah.
It'd be kind of like SETI at home. All of our stuff would just be like kind of have the fan going.
I mean, it's a bit of a science fiction thing, but you can imagine at some point every home will have solar panels, and then maybe every home will also just have a GPU. And maybe we won't have like huge ass server farms. It's just that we have a network and everyone has a GPU. And if my neighbor suddenly wants to do math, then he can borrow my GPU. I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, it kind of sounds cool, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. If people like distributed systems, I mean, might as well go for it.
If you like, if you want to add to the unpredictability of the LLM, like mix in a distributed grid computing that you don't know about too much either, and then you'll get some real
that's
interesting.
Okay. I do want to give like one quick shout out on this one front though, because I do think it's an idea that's worth pursuing. So in Holland, we've got this one cloud provider called Leaf Cloud, and I think they're still around. But what they do is they install these server farms like what we're discussing. They have like a GPU rack.
I think I've heard of them.
At the bottom of like an apartment building, and any excess heat, which is one of the main cost drivers, that's actually used to preheat the water for the rest of the apartment.
Yeah.
So on paper, at least, you do have something that's not only like carbon negative, but also more cost effective, because the person, like the waste product of the compute, is now a thing that the heat that someone is willing to pay for as well. So on paper, you can also be cheaper if you play your cards right.
I ran across this, and I was really inspired by it. I ended up not using Leaf Cloud for anything, but it's a cool idea.
So the one downside of that approach is you do have to be close to a data center, because do you really want to store your private data on disk in an apartment building or in a secure facility? So what they do is they just have glass fiber cables. Like the disk is in the facility, but the memory and the GPU and the compute is in the apartment building. That's sort of the way they do it.
It's like a mounted volume over fiber.
Yes.
Of, like a network volume over fiber. Sure. I think that's pretty common in a lot of data center setups. It just happens to be spanning an apartment complex, which is unusual.
Well, it's also only for certain types of compute loads, right? You're probably not going to do your web app via that apartment building. It's probably not going to be productive. But if you're doing like big simulation, big like deep learning things like that.
Look, everyone knows you can do machine learning training, and it's all good for serverless. You just send the stuff out. It just goes, finds an apartment complex, runs it serverless, and it comes back, right? No, just kidding. No, it's a pretty neat idea.
There's we'll see what the future brings. That's like when I did data science, the joke I always made is like, as a data scientist, I know for sure that like the future is really hard to predict. Like maybe the past is easier to predict, and that's what we do in machine learning. We try to predict the past, and we'll see what these LLMs do. But until then, like, again, also the repeating the lesson from the course. There's some good habits, but in the end, it's not so much the LLM; it's more the stuff around it and how you think about it. And also, small shout out to Marimo. Like, I do think having some UI in the blend as well, such that you could say like, oh, there's a text box here, another text box there. You can kind of play around making your own little LLM app. Like, the thing that I typically do is I hook up Gemini to my YouTube videos to make like summaries for my blog. I'd like try to find little excuses to like improve your life by automating something with these LLM tools, and that's a nice way to get started.
Yeah, there's really, I think we all probably have little opportunities to automate some low stakes thing, but that we spend a lot of time with or hassle or whatever, and let an LLM have at it and write a little Python to make that happen, right?
Yeah, and also like expose yourself to your own slop as well. Like, that's it's the nice thing about building your own apps is also because you then suddenly start to realize when it's also still good to be a human. Like, I'm not gonna have an LLM automate messages to my wife and my kid. That's just not gonna happen because I've seen what these LLMs can output. Like, that's gonna remain on the human side of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly.
But making a summary for my blog on a video, I mean, that feels in the ballpark.
100%. All right. Final word for people interested in this topic. They want to build, want to plug in LLMs as part of that building block. What do you say?
Like, Open Router is nice and flexible. LLM by Simon Willison is great. Disk cache is a thing that you do want to disk cache. And maybe like a final thing that I do maybe want to. It's also fine if you just want to learn Python as well. Like, there's a lot of there's some of this talk of people saying like, oh, we never have to. Like, oh, actually, people from Peru are tuning in. Peru is amazing. Like, I'm seeing people sort of reply in the
conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sweet. Best food of my life, Peru. Also, look, if you're looking for great excuses to learn Python, there's plenty. If you're looking for a great excuse to go to Peru, food. But no, but also like I think in the end, you are going to be better at using LLMs if you can still do things yourself. Like, one thing I've started noticing is that it's a bit embarrassing, but like, oh, what's the CSS property of that thing? I used to know that, but nowadays I just, oh, am I seriously going to ask this to ChatGPT? This should be in my memory, for Pete's sakes.
Yes.
And like, sometimes it's like, I'm going to have a whole conversation with ChatGPT so I can change 4 characters in a style sheet. What is this nonsense? So part of me is also thinking like, definitely expose yourself to LLMs, and if that inspires you, that's great. But also try to not overly rely on it either. It's like I'm building flashcard apps for myself, so I can, I'm still kind of in the loop, if that makes sense. So
you've got to be a guardian of your own mind, and it's
yes.
So I can see it so easily that you just become a machine that just says next, okay, yes, continue, and then in 6 months you're like, gosh, I can't program anything. I just got to ask the chat, and it's a problem. It's a real problem.
It's something. Well, and also, and that kind of gets back to the point I made earlier. You want to be very mindful that if you have better tools, you should also have better ideas. And if that's not the case, then something is wrong. Because that's then you get into the self-learned helplessness territory, and that's the one thing I do want to kind of guard against. Andrei Karpathy gave a great interview a little while ago where he mentioned the worst outcome of humanity. Like, did you see the movie WALL-E? Remember seeing that? Oh my
gosh, that movie really made me sad. Yeah, it's like
it's a good movie though. Like,
it's a fantastic movie, but it's as an adult, it's got a hard undertone to it. Oh my gosh.
Well, and especially now, because like, for people who never watched the movie, there's a scene in the movie where you see what humanity comes to, and it's basically everything has to be convenient. So people are overweight. They're in these like bikes that move them around. They're always able to watch television, drink a milkshake, and eat a pizza. And like, every convenience is sort of taken care of. But you also just see that they're not happy,
and they can't even walk. Like, they can't. They're like they're so just dependent on the thing. It's bad.
Exactly.
It's a sweet show. It's a very sweet show. I recommend it.
Yeah, it's a sweet movie, but it's like if at some point you notice like, hey, learning feels hard, then maybe that's fine, because maybe it's just like exercising. It's okay if that's a bit painful. In fact, if it's not painful, then you're maybe just participating in entertainment instead as well. So like that's the thing. These are thoughts that I'm sort of battling with. I'm also sort of trying to be really critical of like, okay, I work at Marima now. I've access to all these LLMs and stuff, and can I build more awesome software that I wouldn't have before? Like, one thing I made a while ago is I added gamepad support to Marima notebooks, so you can interact with Python with the gamepad and stuff. And this is just a experiment, but I would be really disappointed if I'm the only person making packages that I've never made before that are definitely trying to reach new heights, It does feel a bit lonely because it does feel like more people should do it. So that's like the one sort of hint I want to give to people, like try to inspire yourself a bit more and do more inspirational stuff. So more cool things happen on my timeline. There's less AI slop. It's like really cool software being built, people learning and all that.
Hear, hear. I appreciate that. All right. Well, Vincent, thanks for being back, sharing all these techniques. And yeah, I hope people go out there and build using AIs, not just with AIs.
Definitely. Y'all have a good one.
Yeah. See you later. Bye.